They walked away in silence, until God turned the distance into redemption. Tonight's story begins where words failed, on a quiet street in a small American town, where two hearts walked away without a goodbye. Have you ever left a moment unfinished, and later wished you'd stayed? This is the journey of Naomi and Mateo, two people who let silence grow between them until only God could bridge it. If you've ever wondered whether distance can become a holy place, stay with me. Because in this story, the miles don't just separate, they prepare. You'll see how a broken promise, an unanswered prayer, and a letter never sent become seeds of a miracle only heaven could write. Naomi learned to keep moving, a diner waitress by day, a late-night worshiper by habit, carrying quiet strength and a scar she never shows. Mateo learned to keep working, a contractor restoring old houses, piecing wood back together while his own heart stayed in pieces. They thought time would fix what pride refused to face. It didn't, but God knows how to speak into silence. A church bell that rings at the wrong hour, a sermon that sounds too specific to ignore, a child's drawing left on a table, pointing them both to the same verse, and one unexpected storm that forces them under the same roof, again. Before the end, you'll witness a prayer whispered in a parking lot, a confession that tastes like salt and grace, and a decision that rewrites a future they thought they'd forfeited. Don't blink. The moment redemption steps in looks ordinary at first, like a door opening and two people choosing to stay. If you're carrying a distance of your own, lean in. Let this story remind you, God never wastes the miles. He turns detours into directions and silence into a stage for mercy. Watch to the final scene, because what Naomi and Mateo do there might just be the courage you needed today. Ready? Let's begin. The morning sun touched the small town of Maple Creek with a softness that almost felt apologetic. Naomi stood behind the counter of the diner, her hands moving on instinct, pouring coffee, offering smiles, but her mind replayed the silence of that night 2 years ago. The night Mateo walked away. She had tried to hate him for leaving, but the truth was harder. She missed him not for what he said, but for what he couldn't. There had been words caught in both their throats that evening, truths they didn't know how to deliver without bleeding. Pride had stepped between them like a wall, and neither found the courage to climb it. Now every morning at the diner felt like a routine she couldn't escape, a loop where memories lingered in the smell of burnt toast and coffee beans. She wore her faith quietly, like the small silver cross beneath her apron. Every time she touched it, she whispered a prayer she never finished. Lord, if he's out there, remind him you're not done. The bell above the diner door rang, and Naomi smiled on reflex. But when she turned, her heart skipped. The stranger who entered carried a familiar stillness, the same kind Mateo once had. It wasn't him, of course. Mateo was long gone, somewhere building houses, restoring what was broken for others while refusing to rebuild his own. The thought made Naomi ache in places no doctor could reach. She tried to dismiss it, to move on with the morning rush, but the echo of his name still lingered under her breath like a song she couldn't stop humming. Across town, Mateo wiped sweat from his brow, the scent of sawdust filling the half-finished house. He had returned to Maple Creek quietly, under the excuse of a renovation job. But deep down he knew the truth. This town still held something he hadn't laid to rest. Each plank he nailed, each wall he painted felt like confession in slow motion. He told himself it was just work, but every swing of the hammer whispered Naomi's name. He remembered her laugh, soft, unguarded, the sound that used to dissolve his anger before pride rebuilt it. That night, when the storm broke and the power went out, he should have stayed. He should have told her why he was scared, why the thought of loving someone so good made him feel unworthy. But he chose silence. And silence, as he'd learned, speaks longer than words. The pastor at the local church had offered him coffee that morning, asking gently, "Back for work or something deeper?" Mateo didn't answer. He just stared at the stained glass window depicting the prodigal son. The colors flickered over his hands like a sign he didn't want to read. Maybe he was back for both the work and the redemption. Naomi's shift ended near sunset. She walked home through the narrow streets, her worn sneakers kicking up dust. The town looked the same, yet somehow older, as if even the bricks remembered the things people never said. Her small apartment smelled of coffee and lavender soap. She set her prayer journal on the table and wrote a single line, "Teach me to forgive the silence." Somewhere across town, Mateo stood by the window of his rented cabin, staring at the distant steeple where the bell rang every evening. He had thought time would numb the ache, but it only turned it sacred. Pain, he realized, wasn't always punishment. It was sometimes the way God kept the heart awake. He thought of calling her. He even dialed the first 3 numbers of her old phone, before closing his fist and pressing end. What could he say after 2 years of absence? "I'm sorry" felt too small. "I still care" felt too late. He exhaled, whispering into the silence, "God, if I'm meant to see her again, don't let it be an accident." That prayer hung in the air like a seed waiting for rain. And somewhere, in a diner now closed for the night, Naomi's last prayer echoed almost the same words. "If our paths are meant to cross again, Lord, let it be for your purpose." Heaven heard them both. The angels perhaps smiled. The next morning, Naomi overslept for the first time in months. She rushed out with wet hair, coffee in one hand, and her keys in the other. Her phone buzzed. A message from her friend Leah asking if she could help set up tables at the church community project that weekend. Naomi smiled. She always said yes to small acts of service. They were her way of staying close to God. Mateo, on the other hand, found himself at the hardware store picking supplies for the same church renovation. He hadn't planned to volunteer, but when the pastor mentioned needing an extra set of hands, he felt something tug at his chest. "Sure," he said, surprising even himself. "I'll be there." The day of the event came with sunlight and soft hymns playing in the background. Naomi arrived early, arranging flowers near the stage. The air smelled of new paint and hope. She turned to ask someone for help carrying boxes and froze. There he was, Mateo. Older, rougher, quieter, but unmistakably him. For a moment, time folded. The sound of chatter, footsteps, laughter all faded into a single heartbeat. She didn't move. Neither did he. Their eyes met, and the silence that once separated them now felt fragile, trembling with the weight of 2 years' worth of unspoken prayers. "Naomi," he said finally, the word escaping like a confession. She almost forgot how it sounded. Low, steady, wrapped in regret. "Hi," she answered, the syllable barely audible. Around them, life went on. Children laughing, volunteers calling instructions. But for the two of them, it was as if the world paused to watch what heaven had arranged. They exchanged polite words, safe, formal, distant. He asked about her work. She asked about his projects. Both avoided the only topic that mattered, why he left and whether she'd forgiven him. But under every sentence, Grace waited like light under a door, ready to spill in when either found the courage to open it. When the event ended, Naomi lingered behind to clean up. Mateo stayed too, claiming he had to fix a loose hinge. Neither spoke of it, but both knew the reason. They weren't ready for the moment to end. Finally, as the sun dipped behind the church, he looked at her and whispered, "Maybe God brought me back for more than construction." Naomi's eyes softened, tears threatening. "Maybe he brought us both to rebuild something," she said, half a smile trembling on her lips. He nodded, unable to answer. The silence between them felt different now, not heavy but holy. A pause before a prayer. As they locked the church doors together, a breeze lifted the small cross pendant around Naomi's neck. Mateo's gaze followed it, his heart catching on the reminder of faith he once ran from. For the first time in years, he whispered, "Lord, help me stay." And in the quiet twilight of Maple Creek, heaven answered with peace. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mateo's face. The same eyes that once promised forever and then vanished into silence. She turned on her lamp and opened her prayer journal, the ink trembling as she wrote, "Lord, help me forgive what my heart still remembers." The words bled slightly on the page, like her own hesitation. Forgiveness was simple in sermons, harder in skin. She had dreamed about this day, his return, but never expected it to feel so confusing. The part of her that longed for closure also feared reopening the wound. Still, beneath the ache, there was something else, a quiet peace. As if God whispered, "This is the beginning, not the end." Naomi rested her head on the window glass, watching raindrops trace slow paths like the prayers she never stopped sending. Across town, Mateo sat on the edge of his bed, unable to shake the image of Naomi's trembling smile. He remembered every detail, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the way her hands still looked like safety. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled. "You should have stayed gone," he muttered to himself. But even as he said it, he knew he was lying. He opened his father's old Bible, the one with notes in the margins. It fell open to Isaiah 61. He will rebuild the ancient ruins and restore the places long devastated. Mateo froze. The verse hit deeper than the hammer ever could. Maybe God wasn't calling him to fix walls of wood and plaster, but the walls he had built around his own heart. The next morning, Naomi arrived early at the diner. The smell of fresh biscuits filled the air as she wiped down the counter. She wasn't expecting him, but somehow she felt he'd come. And he did. The doorbell chimed softly, and there he was, standing in his usual way, shoulders squared but eyes uncertain, as if asking permission to exist in her space again. "Coffee?" she asked, forcing casualness into her tone. "Please," he said. Silence hung between them like unspoken scripture. She poured his cup, her hands brushing the edge of his for a fleeting second that felt like a prayer answered too soon. "You're still working on the church?" she asked. "Yeah," he replied. "Still trying to get it right." His words carried more weight than either dared unpack. They exchanged small talk, the weather, town gossip, the pastor's new sermon series. But beneath each polite sentence was a current neither could ignore. The tension wasn't angry anymore. It was sacred, heavy with unfinished grace. When Mateo left, he placed a few bills under the cup and whispered, "Thanks, Naomi." She smiled faintly. "For the coffee or the forgiveness?" she asked. He paused, unable to answer. That afternoon, Naomi visited Leah at the church office. "He's back," she admitted, voice small. Leah looked up from her paperwork, eyes wide. "Mateo, after all this time?" Naomi nodded. "And I don't know what God wants me to do with that." Leah smiled softly. "Maybe he wants you to stop running from what still hurts." Leah's words lingered like a psalm. Naomi walked into the sanctuary, empty except for the light streaming through stained glass. She sat on the last pew and whispered, "Lord, I don't know how to face him without reopening everything." Her voice broke, and the silence answered with peace. Somewhere deep in her spirit she heard, "You're not reopening a wound, you're uncovering where I'll heal." Meanwhile, Mateo stood on the church scaffolding, replacing a beam that had cracked. As he worked, he noticed how fragile it was, strong on the outside, hollow inside. He realized he'd become just like it. For years, he'd been the man who could fix anything except himself. "Lord," he murmured, "teach me to rebuild what I broke." That night, rain returned to Maple Creek. Naomi sat by her window, watching the streetlights shimmer in puddles. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Naomi?" The voice was hesitant, deep, familiar. "Mateo?" She whispered. "I didn't mean to call. My hand must have—" "No," she interrupted softly. "Maybe it wasn't your hand." Silence. Then laughter, awkward, nervous, healing. They spoke about small things, the rain, the diner, how time changed everything and nothing at all. Before hanging up, Mateo said, "It's strange. After all these years, you still sound like home." Naomi's throat tightened. "And you still sound like unfinished prayers," she replied, and the line went quiet. The next day, she arrived at the church with homemade muffins, claiming it was for the volunteers. Mateo smiled when he saw her, flour dust still on her apron. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know," she answered. "But sometimes grace looks like muffins." He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years, and something cracked open in both of them. They worked side by side, sweeping dust, painting walls, sharing stories about the years they'd lost. Naomi learned that Mateo's mother had passed away last winter. Mateo learned Naomi had nearly moved away but stayed because she felt God wasn't done here. Their eyes met across the pews, and for the first time it didn't hurt. It just felt honest. Later, the pastor approached them with a smile. "You two make a good team," he said. Naomi blushed. Mateo chuckled nervously. "We used to," he said. "Maybe we still do." The pastor nodded knowingly. Sometimes God rebuilds teams before he rebuilds trust. The words hit like prophecy. As the afternoon sun poured through the stained glass, Naomi traced her fingers along the fresh paint on the wall. "Funny," she said. "This place used to feel cold." Mateo handed her a brush. "Maybe it wasn't the building," he said. Their eyes met again, holding longer this time, unafraid of what it meant. When the day ended, Naomi sat on the church steps, shoes dusty and heartful. Mateo joined her, holding 2 cups of lemonade. "Truce?" he asked. "I didn't know we were still at war." she teased. Then maybe we can call it peace. She smiled. Peace sounds good. Above them, the church bell rang softly, 1, 2, 3, as if heaven approved. They didn't talk about the past that evening. They didn't have to. It was there, sitting quietly between them, finally losing its power. Sometimes, healing begins not with explanations but with shared silence that no longer hurts. Naomi leaned back, whispering, I thought I'd buried everything. Mateo replied gently, maybe God just planted it. The wind carried the scent of rain and wildflowers. Naomi closed her eyes, letting the breeze brush her face. You know, she said, I prayed that God would teach me to forgive you. He looked at her, eyes steady. And she smiled faintly. He started by teaching me to see you differently. Mateo's breath caught. And how do you see me now? As someone God still loves, she answered. The streetlights flickered on, painting gold over the church steps. Mateo turned his gaze toward the steeple. You think there's hope for us? He asked quietly. Naomi took a deep breath, her fingers brushing the small cross at her neck. There's always hope, she said, especially when God's the one rebuilding. And as the evening settled, two hearts that once broke apart began to beat again, in rhythm with redemption. The next morning came wrapped in golden light, as if heaven itself had decided to bless Maple Creek. Naomi awoke earlier than usual, her heart strangely lighter. She made coffee, humming softly to a worship song that spoke about second chances. Yet, beneath her calm rhythm, questions lingered. What did God want her to do with Mateo's return? Was this reconciliation or a test? She stood before the mirror, tying her auburn hair into a neat braid. The woman looking back at her wasn't the same one from 2 years ago. She had learned to walk through storms, to pray when her voice trembled, to believe when nothing made sense. Lord, she whispered, help me not to fear what you're restoring. Outside, the morning breeze moved the curtains gently, like an unseen amen. Mateo, meanwhile, loaded lumber into his truck, preparing for another day at the church site. Each sound, the creak of boards, the clink of tools, echoed through his thoughts like reminders of unfinished prayers. He had tried to bury the guilt, but every nail he drove into wood felt like one more plea for redemption. God, he murmured, help me rebuild what I broke, even if it's just me. When he arrived at the church, Naomi was already there, organizing supplies. She looked up, surprised but not startled. You're early, she said. Couldn't sleep, he admitted. She smiled softly. Guess we're both restless builders. They shared a brief laugh, light, real, healing. For the first time, they stood near without feeling the weight of what had been lost. As they worked, children from the Sunday school arrived, running around with energy only joy could produce. Naomi helped a little girl paint a wooden heart, and Mateo watched from a distance. The sight stirred something deep inside him. Naomi always had a gift for kindness, the kind that didn't preach but revealed God's love in quiet ways. Watching her made him wonder if grace could still include him. You still pray like you used to? She asked suddenly, breaking his thoughts. He hesitated, wiping paint off his hands. I try, he said. But sometimes I feel like God stopped listening. Naomi met his eyes. Maybe he was waiting for you to stop running. Her tone wasn't harsh, just honest. The words landed softly like a truth that had waited a long time to be spoken. The pastor stopped by around noon, checking their progress. You two are doing great work, he said warmly. This place is starting to feel alive again. Mateo nodded, glancing at Naomi. Maybe it's not just the building, he said. The pastor smiled knowingly. Redemption tends to rebuild more than walls, son. It rebuilds people. Later that afternoon, rain clouds gathered again, sudden and heavy. Thunder rolled over the hills, echoing through the empty sanctuary. Naomi and Mateo rushed inside to move the supplies out of the downpour. As they stood near the altar, rain tapping against the windows, the air between them changed. It wasn't tension. It was truth knocking, asking to be heard. You never said why you left, Naomi whispered, her voice steady but fragile. Mateo looked away, the storm outside matching the one in his chest. Because I was scared, he said. You deserved someone steady, someone whole. And I wasn't, she frowned gently. So you thought leaving would protect me? He nodded. I thought it was mercy. But it was just fear dressed up as love. Tears welled in her eyes, not from anger, but from understanding. You could have told me, she said quietly. I would have stayed and helped you heal. He shook his head. I didn't want you to fix me, Naomi. I wanted to be worthy of you. She reached out, touching his arm lightly. And what if I never asked you to be worthy, just honest? For a moment, silence filled the church, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was sacred. Rainlight spilled through the stained glass, scattering colors over them like blessings. Mateo closed his eyes, the weight he'd carried for years beginning to shift. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Naomi smiled through her tears. "You already said it with your presence." They spent the rest of the afternoon mopping rainwater, laughter replacing sorrow. It was awkward at first, then effortless, as if God himself decided to teach them how to laugh again. By the time the storm passed, the air smelled of wet earth and renewal. "Looks like the worst is over," Mateo said, wringing out a towel. "Maybe it's just beginning," Naomi replied softly. That evening, Naomi stopped by the church again after closing the diner. The pews were empty, but the air still carried the warmth of the day. She sat near the front, whispering a prayer of thanks. "You're doing something here, Lord, I can feel it." Her voice broke. "Just help me trust it." Outside, fireflies flickered across the churchyard, tiny lanterns of grace. Mateo found her there moments later, having forgotten his tool bag. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said gently. Naomi smiled without turning. "I come here when I'm not sure what to feel." He walked closer. "And what do you feel now?" She looked at him, eyes glistening. "Hope, and that scares me." He sat beside her in the pew, the quiet stretching between them like a bridge. "You're not the only one," he said. "I don't know how to hope without expecting disappointment." Naomi nodded. "Maybe that's why God keeps breaking our plans, so we'll finally trust his." Mateo chuckled softly. "You always did preach better than the pastor." They talked for hours, not about the past, but about faith, family, and the small ways God had met them in the waiting. Mateo shared how in his darkest season, a stranger prayed for him at a gas station and told him, "Your story's not over." Naomi smiled. "Sounds like something God would do." "Maybe it was him," Mateo said quietly. When the clock struck 9, Naomi stood. "I should go," she said. "Early shift tomorrow." Mateo rose too, reluctant to end the peace between them. "Naomi," he said softly. She turned, expectant. "Thank you for still believing in what could be rebuilt." She smiled faintly. "It's not me," she said. "It's grace. I'm just learning to stay where it's working." As she walked out, the moonlight fell through the window, tracing her silhouette like a promise. Mateo lingered inside, whispering a prayer into the empty sanctuary. "God, I don't know where this leads, but I want to follow you this time. No more running." The words echoed softly against the walls as if the church itself whispered amen. Outside, Naomi paused by her car, feeling the wind brush her face. She looked back at the church, light still shining through the stained glass. It reminded her of something Leah once said. "God doesn't fix what's broken. He makes it new." Naomi smiled. Maybe, just maybe, she was ready for new. That night, as both lay in their separate homes, neither could sleep. Not because of restlessness, but because peace had found them, and peace often feels strange at first. Miles apart but hearts aligned, Naomi whispered, "Lord, if you're in this, I'll stay." Across town, Mateo whispered the same words. And heaven, listening close, began to weave redemption into their story. The morning after the storm felt like a new beginning for Maple Creek. Sunlight spilled through wet leaves, making the streets glisten as though the town itself had been baptized overnight. Naomi arrived early at the diner, humming quietly as she arranged flowers on each table. She didn't know why, but her heart carried a calm she hadn't felt in years, like peace had finally found a place to sit. Leah noticed it immediately. "You're glowing," she teased, pouring coffee. Naomi laughed. "It's just the weather." But Leah arched an eyebrow. "Or maybe someone's back in town." Naomi tried to deflect, but her silence gave her away. Leah smiled knowingly. "Naomi, when God restores, he doesn't just return what you lost. He gives back what you thought you'd never feel again." Across town, Mateo stood before the newly restored church door, tightening the last screw. The wood gleamed, smooth and strong, a symbol of all the things he'd left unfinished and was now brave enough to face. He leaned against the doorframe, wiping his hands. "Looks good," the pastor said behind him. Mateo nodded. "Better than before." The pastor smiled. "So are you." That afternoon, Naomi stopped by the church with a tray of sandwiches for the volunteers. She wasn't expecting Mateo to be alone, bent over his workbench, sleeves rolled up, focus unwavering. "You don't take breaks, do you?" she asked. He looked up, startled but smiling. "Guess I forgot how." She placed the tray down. "Then I'll remind you." They sat outside beneath the oak tree, sharing sandwiches in comfortable silence. Birds chirped above and sunlight filtered through the branches. "I used to dream about this," Naomi said softly. "Not this exact moment, but peace like this. I just didn't think it would ever come from you." Mateo looked down, humbled. "Neither did I. But I'm starting to believe God uses the same people we failed to show us grace." A breeze stirred the leaves, and Naomi closed her eyes, letting it pass through her hair. "You know," she said, "I used to pray you'd come back." He turned to her. "And now?" She smiled faintly. "Now I just pray we both learn to stay." The simplicity of her words struck deeper than any confession. Staying had always been harder than leaving. That evening, they painted the final wall inside the sanctuary. The golden light through the stained glass made everything glow. Naomi dipped her brush, humming a hymn under her breath. Mateo joined in quietly, his deep voice blending with hers until the sound filled the empty church. It wasn't just a song, it was a prayer disguised as music. When they finished, Mateo stepped back to admire their work. "It's strange," he said. "We're fixing this place, but it feels like it's fixing me." Naomi nodded. "Maybe that's what grace does, it rebuilds from the inside out." He looked at her, then really looked. "You've changed," he said softly. "So have you," she replied. "Maybe that's why we finally met in the middle." Later, as they cleaned the brushes, Naomi accidentally splashed paint on his shirt. "Oh no," she gasped, laughing. He grinned. "Guess it's payback for when I spilled coffee on you years ago." They both laughed until their sides hurt. The church echoed with joy that hadn't been heard in years. It was as if even the walls were relieved to witness laughter again. The next day, Leah convinced Naomi to join her for evening worship. Naomi hesitated but agreed. When she entered the church, her heart skipped. Mateo was there too, standing in the back, hands clasped, eyes closed in quiet prayer. She watched him for a moment, realizing that redemption didn't always arrive with grand gestures. Sometimes it came as a bowed head and a humbled heart. During the service, the pastor spoke about forgiveness. "Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself," he said. Naomi glanced at Mateo, and he opened his eyes at the same time, as if drawn by her thought. Their gazes met across the pews, and in that silent exchange, words became unnecessary. God was already speaking between them. After the service, Mateo waited outside as the congregation left. Naomi approached slowly, holding her Bible to her chest. "That sermon felt personal," she said. He smiled wryly. "Yeah, I think God's been eavesdropping." She laughed softly. "He tends to do that." The moonlight cast gentle shadows around them, and for a moment neither wanted to break the silence. "Naomi," he began, voice low, "do you ever think some distances are meant to teach us how to value presence?" She tilted her head. "I think distance teaches us what words can't, and presence heals what distance broke." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe we're finally learning both." The conversation lingered in the air like a benediction. The following week, Naomi helped the church prepare for its reopening ceremony. She decorated tables, arranged flowers, and rehearsed the worship set. Mateo worked late into the night fixing the old church sign, restoring the faded letters that once read House of Mercy. As he painted, he whispered, "Yeah, that sounds right." The morning of the reopening came bright and clear. The whole town gathered, curious and hopeful. Naomi wore a simple white dress with small floral details, and Mateo wore a clean shirt for once, though paint still marked the cuffs, a small reminder of grace at work. The pastor thanked everyone, then looked at Mateo. "Would you say a few words?" he asked. Mateo froze. Public speaking wasn't his strength, but Naomi nodded encouragingly from the front row. He stepped forward, voice steady but full of emotion. "This church isn't just wood and stone," he said. "It's proof that what's broken can be made new. I left this town ashamed of my failures, but God, He doesn't leave us in ruins. He rebuilds us even when we think we're beyond repair." The room fell silent. Even the children stilled. Naomi's eyes glistened as she watched him. In that moment, she didn't see the man who walked away. She saw the man who returned. The man who let God finish what pride once interrupted. Applause broke out softly, growing stronger as the congregation stood in agreement. After the service, Naomi found him standing outside beneath the oak tree again. "You spoke beautifully," she said. He chuckled. "My hands were shaking the whole time." "That's how you know it was real," she replied. "God uses trembling voices to speak the loudest truths." Mateo looked at her, gratitude softening his features. "You were always braver than me." She shook her head. "No, Mateo. We're just learning to be brave at the same time now." He smiled, the kind that carried both relief and reverence. "Then maybe this time we'll walk forward instead of away." Naomi's eyes filled with quiet certainty. "One step at a time," she said. "That's how grace moves." As they stood there, the church bells began to ring, slow, steady, sacred. The town cheered in the distance, but for Naomi and Mateo, everything else faded. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, only that the God who brought them back together was still writing the next chapter. And for the first time, neither of them felt afraid to turn the page. A week after the church's reopening, Maple Creek seemed to move slower, as if time itself wanted to savor the peace that had settled over it. Naomi found herself waking up before dawn, sitting by the window with her coffee and Bible, whispering prayers that no longer sounded desperate, but thankful. For the first time in years, she didn't pray for God to change Mateo. She prayed he would keep changing them both. Mateo spent his mornings fixing small repairs around town, an old fence for a widow, a creaky porch for the bakery owner. People began to notice something different about him. He wasn't the man who once left without a word. He was the man who now stayed until the job was done, and somewhere between the sound of hammers and morning birds, he learned that redemption wasn't a single moment. It was daily obedience. One afternoon, Naomi stopped by his workshop with a box of donuts. "You're becoming Maple Creek's favorite handyman," she teased. Mateo grinned. "Guess I'm finally putting my mistakes to work," she smiled. "That's how grace operates. It recycles failure into purpose." He laughed softly. "You sound like the pastor again." "No," she said. "Just someone who's been forgiven too many times to stay silent." Their friendship began to rebuild itself slowly, like a bridge made of trust and quiet conversations. They walked together after work, sometimes to the lake, sometimes through the old neighborhood where they used to dream. Naomi talked about her faith. Mateo listened. Then Mateo spoke about guilt. Naomi listened. It was a rhythm that healed, one heart speaking while the other stayed still enough to hear. "You know what I realized?" he said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the sky in gold. "For years I kept asking God to fix what I lost, but he was trying to fix who I was." Naomi looked at him, her eyes reflecting the light. "Maybe that's why he let the distance last this long. So when we met again, we'd see each other differently." He nodded. "Not as what we were, but who we're becoming." As days passed, Naomi noticed small things. How Mateo would pause before responding, how he offered help without being asked, how his laugh had changed. It was softer now, freer. She didn't want to rush anything. Healing took time, and she had learned that silence, when filled with grace, could be sacred instead of lonely. Sometimes love grows best in quiet places. One evening, Naomi invited him to dinner at her apartment, a simple meal of soup and bread. He hesitated at first, then accepted. When he arrived, the table was lit by a single candle. "It's not fancy," she said shyly. "It's perfect," he replied. They prayed before eating, their hands nearly touching over the table. The moment was fragile, holy, the kind that angels pause to witness. After dinner, they sat by the window listening to rain. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we hadn't fallen apart?" she asked. Mateo thought for a moment. "I used to," he said. "But now I think about what God can do with the pieces." Naomi smiled softly. Then maybe it wasn't falling apart, it was falling into his hands. The next day, Leah dropped by the diner and caught Naomi smiling at nothing. "Okay," she said, sitting down. "What's going on?" Naomi laughed, shaking her head. "Nothing. Just peace," Leah smirked. "Peace that looks suspiciously like someone." Naomi sighed, half embarrassed, half joyful. "Leah, I'm not sure what God's doing, but I know he's in it, and that's enough for me." Meanwhile, Mateo began attending the men's Bible study group at the church. The first time he spoke, his voice shook. "I used to think repentance was a one-time thing," he said, "but I'm learning it's a lifestyle. You wake up, admit you still need grace, and thank God it hasn't run out." The men nodded quietly, some with tears in their eyes. A few weeks later, one of them told Naomi, "You were right about him. He's different now." Naomi felt her heart warm at those words. Not pride, just gratitude. She'd prayed for this long before she ever knew how it would unfold. Sometimes love doesn't need to fight for a person. It just needs to keep praying for them until God finishes his work. And now, watching Mateo live out what she once only dreamed of, she understood what it meant to let God write the story. One Sunday afternoon after service, the pastor announced a community project, restoring the town's old library into a youth center. "We'll need volunteers," he said. Naomi looked at Mateo and their eyes met instantly. They both smiled. "Count us in," they said in unison. The pastor chuckled. "Seems like the two of you come as a pair these days." Naomi blushed but didn't deny it. Working on the library brought back memories. The same teamwork, the same laughter, but now rooted in something deeper: trust, faith, forgiveness. One day, while painting a mural with the kids, Naomi turned and found Mateo watching her with quiet admiration. "What?" she asked, blushing. "Nothing," he said, "just seeing answered prayers in color." That evening, as they locked up the library, Mateo hesitated. "Naomi," he said, voice low, "I've wanted to tell you something." She looked at him, heart thudding. "You don't have to," she whispered. "I do," he said. "Back then when I left, I told myself I didn't deserve you. But now I realize it wasn't about deserving, it was about surrendering. And I want to keep surrendering. To God and maybe to this." Naomi's eyes filled with tears, not from pain, but from peace. "Mateo," she said softly, "I don't need promises this time. I just need consistency." He nodded, emotion thick in his voice. "Then that's what I'll give, one day at a time, as long as God lets me." She smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "That's all I ever prayed for." The following weeks moved like music, steady, gentle, purposeful. They weren't rushing toward romance. They were learning partnership again, with God at the center. Their story wasn't about rewriting the past, but living differently in the present. Naomi found herself thanking God for every ordinary moment. A shared coffee, a kind word, a prayer whispered side by side. One night, as they closed the library after a late meeting, the power went out unexpectedly. The only light came from Naomi's phone, casting a soft glow on their faces. "Guess we're stuck for a while," she said. Mateo smiled. "Then maybe it's a good time to pray." They stood together in the quiet dark, hands clasped, praying not for clarity, but for courage to keep walking the path of grace. When the lights finally returned, they didn't step apart right away. The world looked softer somehow, as if the darkness had taught them something light never could. "Thank you," Mateo said suddenly. "For what?" Naomi asked. "For never closing the door, even when I deserved it." She shook her head gently. "I didn't leave it open for you," she said. "I left it open for grace." As the night deepened, they walked outside, the air cool and calm. The street was quiet except for the soft hum of crickets. "Do you think people ever really change?" Naomi asked. Mateo thought for a moment, then said, "No. I think God changes people, and we just have to let him." She smiled, slipping her hand briefly into his. "Then maybe we're finally letting him." The stars shimmered above Maple Creek, and somewhere in that stillness, heaven smiled. What began as silence had become surrender. What was once distance had become devotion. And as Naomi and Mateo walked home under the quiet sky, their steps fell in rhythm. Not with fear or nostalgia, but with grace that had finally learned to listen. Autumn arrived quietly in Maple Creek, turning the trees into cathedrals of gold and fire. The air smelled of apples and rain, and the town seemed to breathe slower. Naomi loved this season. It always felt like renewal wearing the colors of farewell. She walked to the library one morning, scarf around her neck, praying softly, "Lord, help us keep what you've rebuilt steady. Don't let old fears steal new beginnings." Mateo was already there, sorting through shelves of books donated for the youth center. He glanced up when she entered, his face lighting up in that quiet way that didn't need words. "You're early," he said. "Habit," she smiled. "Some things never change." He laughed softly. "Good. I like the things that stay." They exchanged a look that held both gratitude and something tender still growing. As they worked side by side, Naomi noticed a subtle weight in Mateo's silence. His hands moved slower. His eyes drifted often. "You okay?" she asked gently. He nodded but didn't meet her gaze. just tired. She could tell it wasn't just physical. Something inside him was stirring, a truth wrestling to be spoken. She said nothing more, only prayed silently that when the time came, Grace would be ready to receive it. Later that afternoon, as the children left and the lights dimmed, Mateo leaned against the window frame, staring at the falling leaves. "Naomi," he said, voice low, "there's something I've never told you." Her breath caught. "About when I left," she nodded, steadying her heart. "I'm listening." He swallowed hard. "It wasn't just fear. It was guilt. I wasn't just running from us, I was running from something I did." She felt her pulse quicken but stayed still. "Go on," she whispered. He exhaled shakily. "Before I left town, I took a job that wasn't mine. I lied to someone to get it. When it came out, it cost the company thousands. I was fired. That's why I left. I couldn't face you, Naomi. You deserved truth, and I only had failure." His voice broke and silence filled the room like heavy rain. Naomi's eyes softened, tears forming, but not from anger. "You thought you had to protect me from your flaws," she said quietly. "But I never asked for perfection, Mateo. I asked for honesty." He nodded, shame thick in his chest. "I know. But back then I didn't even know how to tell the truth to myself." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Then maybe this is the first time you're really home." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "You're not angry?" She smiled through tears. "I'm sad for what fear stole from us. But angry? No, because I've been forgiven too many times to hold Grace hostage." Mateo's lips parted, overwhelmed. "I don't deserve that." Naomi shook her head softly. "None of us do. That's what makes it Grace." Her words landed like balm, healing wounds years deep. They sat together on the floor, backs against the wall, surrounded by books and quiet light. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of rain outside was the only witness to their confession. Finally, Naomi whispered, "You know, healing doesn't always sound like joy at first. Sometimes it sounds like the truth finally being told." Mateo nodded, his eyes glistening. "Then maybe this is what healing sounds like." The following Sunday, Mateo approached the pastor after service. "Can I share something?" he asked. The pastor listened quietly as Mateo told his story. Not every detail, but enough to turn shame into testimony. When he finished, the pastor placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son, confession isn't the end of the road, it's the first step toward real freedom." Mateo exhaled, and for the first time his chest didn't feel heavy. Naomi watched from the back pew, tears slipping silently. She wasn't proud of him for being perfect, she was proud of him for being transparent. As the congregation prayed over him, she bowed her head and whispered, "Thank you, God, for the kind of love that tells the truth even when it shakes." Outside, the church bells began to ring, each toll echoing like a heartbeat of grace. That evening she met him by the lake. The water shimmered beneath the setting sun, rippling with light. "I heard what you shared," she said softly. He looked down, embarrassed. "I didn't mean for everyone to know." "They needed to," she replied. "Because someone out there needed to hear that it's not too late to start over." He smiled faintly. "And I needed to hear it too." They sat on the old wooden bench, shoulders brushing. "You know what I realized today?" he said. "I used to think love was about being enough for someone, but now I think it's about being truthful before God." Naomi smiled gently. "Truth is where real love breathes." He nodded. "Then maybe this time we'll both learn to breathe." Days turned into weeks and the youth center project neared completion. Naomi organized a small event for the kids, music, games, and prayer. Mateo built wooden benches by hand, each one engraved with a verse. When she read them later, she found one that made her heart tremble. "Be still and know that I am God." He'd carved it just for her. "You remembered," she said the next day. "That verse got me through when you were gone." He smiled softly. "It got me through when I finally came back." They stood there quietly, sunlight falling through the open windows like grace incarnate. Naomi whispered, "Sometimes I think we're both living proof that God rebuilds what pride destroys." Mateo's answer was simple, and he uses patience as the hammer. That evening, as they closed up, Leah appeared at the door, smiling. "You two look like a story God hasn't finished yet," she teased. Naomi laughed. "He's definitely rewriting some chapters." Mateo chuckled. "Let's hope for a better ending." Leah winked. "With grace, endings always turn into beginnings." And with that, she left them standing in the warm glow of evening. After she was gone, Naomi leaned against the wall, her voice soft. "Do you think people can really outgrow their past?" Mateo thought for a moment. "I think we can't outgrow it, but we can outgrace it." Naomi smiled. Outgrace. I like that word. "It's what you've been doing since the day I came back," he said. "Every time you look at me, I see who I could still become." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes meeting his. "Mateo, don't look at me that way. Look up. That's where grace comes from." He nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "Still," he whispered, "I think God used you to remind me where to look." Their eyes lingered for a moment, holy and human all at once. That night, Naomi returned home, opened her prayer journal, and wrote, "He told me the truth, Lord, and somehow I love him more for it. Thank you for teaching me that redemption sounds like confession whispered through trembling lips." She closed the journal and smiled, feeling peace settle in like a soft blanket. Across town, Mateo sat by the window, watching the same moon Naomi prayed under. He whispered, "Thank you, God, for the woman who forgave me before I could forgive myself." His voice cracked. "Teach me to love like that, slow, honest, and rooted in you." He didn't know it yet, but heaven had already begun answering that prayer. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and wood smoke. Somewhere between the two homes, invisible yet undeniable, was the sound of healing. Quiet, real, sacred. The distance that once tore them apart had now become the space where God's mercy echoed loudest. And for Naomi and Mateo, the truth no longer weighed them down. It lifted them toward grace. Winter crept gently into Maple Creek, dusting the rooftops with frost and the mornings with silence. Naomi wrapped her scarf tighter as she walked toward the youth center, her breath painting clouds in the cold air. She whispered a quiet prayer, the kind that needed no eloquence. "Lord, keep us steady in this new season." It wasn't just a prayer for weather. It was for the fragile peace growing between her and Mateo. The center was nearly finished. Children's laughter already echoed through the halls as the town came together to help. Mateo worked outside, building a wooden sign that read, "The Haven." Naomi smiled when she saw it. "You named it?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, eyes soft. "Because that's what grace feels like, a haven after the storm." She nodded, voice catching. "Then that's exactly what this place will be." Later that afternoon, as snow began to fall, they sat by the window with cups of hot cocoa, watching the flakes blur the world into white. "Funny," Naomi said quietly, "how something cold can look so peaceful." Mateo chuckled. "Maybe because it covers what's broken for a while." She looked at him, eyes warm. "Or maybe because it reminds us how new things can still fall from heaven." Days turned into weeks, and the town prepared for Christmas. The church was decorated with garlands, candles, and soft lights that made everything glow like hope. Naomi helped organize the nativity play for the children, while Mateo volunteered to build the manger. Every nail he hammered felt symbolic, a small act of reverence, a prayer made of wood. One evening, Naomi found him alone in the sanctuary, finishing the manger. The candlelight flickered across his face as he sanded the edges. "You're still here," she said softly. He smiled. "Yeah, I wanted it to be right." She stepped closer. "It already is." He looked up, and for a moment neither moved. The quiet between them wasn't empty anymore, it was holy. "Naomi," he began, voice barely above a whisper, "do you ever wonder why God gave us another chance?" She hesitated, then said, "Because we finally learned what to do with it." He smiled faintly. "You think we deserve this?" "No," she replied gently. "But that's the beauty of grace. It keeps showing up even when we stop expecting it." The next morning, Naomi found a folded note on her counter. It was from Mateo. "Meet me at the lake tonight. There's something I want to show you." Her heart skipped, both nervous and curious. She worked through the day with distracted smiles, her mind replaying every word they'd shared these past months. Whatever awaited at the lake, she felt it was something sacred. When evening came, the lake shimmered under moonlight, frozen at the edges, still in the center. Mateo stood waiting, holding a lantern that cast a golden glow around him. "You came," he said softly. Naomi smiled. "You asked." They walked along the water's edge, their steps crunching over snow. The world felt hushed, as if heaven leaned closer to listen. "When I left years ago," Mateo began, I thought silence would protect me from truth, but it only made me deaf to God's voice. Naomi nodded, her eyes glistening. And when you came back? He looked at her, steady now. I finally heard him say, it's time to stay. His words hung in the cold air, warm with sincerity. Naomi's breath caught in her chest. They stopped near the old bench where they once sat as teenagers, dreaming about futures they were too afraid to claim. Mateo set the lantern down and pulled something from his coat pocket. A small wooden cross, handcrafted, smooth from hours of work. I made this for you, he said. Not as a promise of forever, but as a reminder that God's grace rebuilt what we destroyed. Naomi took it in her trembling hands, tears blurring her vision. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's truth, he replied. We don't need vows right now. We need roots. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. Then let's plant them here. He nodded, smiling through emotion. Here, where silence used to live. Snow began to fall again, soft and slow. Naomi felt time blur as they stood there, the past behind them, the future waiting quietly ahead. You know, she said, I used to pray that God would make you come back to me. He raised an eyebrow. And now? Now, she said. I just pray we both stay where he's leading. He nodded. That's a prayer I'll keep echoing. The days leading up to Christmas were filled with warmth. Naomi and Mateo worked together decorating the youth center, stringing lights, wrapping gifts, preparing for the children's play. Laughter echoed through the halls, and sometimes their hands brushed accidentally, sparking a familiar yet new tenderness. Love had returned, not loud but lasting. During the Christmas Eve service, the church glowed with candles as the congregation sang Silent Night. Naomi stood beside Mateo, their voices blending softly. As the final verse faded, she felt him reach for her hand. He didn't look at her, he didn't need to. Their joined hands spoke what words couldn't. God had finished what he began. After the service, the pastor approached them, smiling warmly. You two are a living sermon, he said. Mateo laughed, embarrassed. We've had a few rewrites. The pastor nodded. That's what redemption is, a second draft written in grace. Naomi smiled. And God never wastes a story. The pastor's eyes twinkled. Especially not one like yours. That night, the youth center opened its doors for the first time. Children ran through the halls, laughter bouncing off every wall Mateo had built. Naomi stood by the door, watching joy unfold. When Mateo joined her, she whispered, Look at this. It's everything we prayed for. He nodded. It's more than I deserve. She smiled. That's how you know it's from God. As the evening ended, they stepped outside. The sky was clear, stars scattered like promises waiting to be believed. Do you ever think about tomorrow? Naomi asked. Mateo took a deep breath. Sometimes. But lately I'm more grateful for today, because I finally learned that love doesn't live in what's next. It lives in what's faithful. She looked at him, eyes reflecting starlight. You're not running anymore, are you? He shook his head slowly. No, I think I finally found what I was running from, peace. Naomi smiled. Then maybe the promise isn't about us being perfect. Maybe it's about never leaving the place God restored. He nodded, his voice soft. That's a promise I can keep. They stood there in silence, hands clasped, the sound of children laughing faintly behind them. The stars shimmered above and the wind whispered through the trees. The distance that once broke them had turned into ground they both stood on, steady, forgiven, whole. Naomi leaned her head gently against his shoulder, and in that moment, everything felt new. Later that night, as she lay in bed, Naomi wrote in her journal, Grace rebuilt what pride destroyed. Forgiveness planted what fear uprooted, and love stayed. Across town, Mateo prayed the same prayer he'd whispered on the night he returned. Lord, help me stay. And heaven, smiling quietly, marked it as the kind of promise that lasts beyond endings. The first light of dawn painted Maple Creek in soft gold, and for a moment the whole town looked like a promise fulfilled. Naomi stood by her window, coffee in hand, watching snow melt slowly from the rooftops. It was a new year, a clean page. She smiled softly, whispering, You've been good, Lord. Even when we weren't ready, you still finished what grace began. The words lingered in the quiet, holy and true. At the youth center, laughter already filled the halls. Children played, music played low, and Mateo was there, fixing a loose window latch like it was the most important job in the world. When Naomi walked in, he looked up and smiled, that quiet smile that always reached his eyes now. "You're early," he teased. "Grace doesn't sleep in," she said. "It shows up before anyone else." They shared coffee near the window where they'd once spoken about fear. This time no fear lingered, just the calm that comes when love stops asking if it will last and starts choosing to stay. "It's strange," Naomi said softly, "how peace can be louder than chaos once you stop running." Mateo nodded. Maybe peace isn't the absence of storms. It's learning who's in the boat with you. Later that afternoon, the pastor gathered the volunteers to thank them for the project's success. "This place is more than walls," he said. "It's a testimony that when people forgive, God multiplies it. When hearts return, heaven celebrates." Naomi felt tears sting her eyes. Mateo reached for her hand under the table, and for once she didn't pull away. Grace had turned holding hands into worship. That evening, Naomi walked to the church alone, needing a quiet moment. The sanctuary was empty except for the glow of candles and the faint hum of the heating vents. She knelt at the altar, whispering prayers of gratitude. "Thank you for teaching me that love isn't about being found, it's about being faithful. Thank you for finishing what I was too afraid to begin." Her tears fell softly on the wood like offerings only heaven could count. She didn't hear Mateo enter, but she felt it. The quiet presence that once left now standing behind her. "I didn't want to interrupt," he said softly. She turned, smiling through tears. "You're not interrupting. You're part of the prayer." He smiled, stepping closer. "Naomi, I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know who's holding us." She nodded. "And that's all we need." They sat together in the pews as the last light of sunset poured through the stained glass, coloring their faces with shades of mercy and gold. "Do you ever think about what we'd say if someone asked how this all happened?" Mateo asked. Naomi laughed gently. "I'd say God isn't done with anyone, especially the ones who think they're too far gone." He smiled. "Then maybe we should tell more people that." "Maybe we should," she agreed. Her tone carried that quiet conviction that always came before something new, something calling. Mateo tilted his head. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" She nodded slowly. "Let's open the haven not just for children, but for everyone who's forgotten that second chances still exist." His eyes softened. "You mean for people like us?" "Exactly," she said. "For people like us." The following week, they began making plans, counseling sessions, community dinners, faith workshops. The youth center became more than a building. It became a beacon. Word spread, and soon people came from nearby towns, drawn not by advertising but by presence. The kind that only comes when God lives inside the work. Naomi often said, "We're not changing lives. We're reminding them that God already can." One afternoon, as they finished painting a new sign outside, a little boy approached. "Mr. Mateo," he asked, "why do you build so many things?" Mateo smiled, kneeling to meet his eyes. "Because I used to break things. Now I build to say thank you." The boy grinned and ran off. Naomi watched, her heart swelling. She thought, this is what redemption looks like, when broken hands learn to create again. As months passed, their bond deepened, not through grand declarations, but through faith lived daily. They prayed before decisions, laughed over small mistakes, and forgave quickly. Every shared look said what words didn't need to. Love had become their language and grace their rhythm. The town noticed too. Someone once said, "When Mateo and Naomi walk into a room, peace follows." And they were right. One Sunday, the pastor invited Naomi to speak at church. She hesitated, then stepped forward, her voice steady but full of heart. "Sometimes," she said, "God answers prayers not by changing the story, but by changing us inside the story. I used to think redemption was a single moment. But it's not, it's daily grace. It's waking up and choosing to love again even when yesterday hurt." The room was silent, tears glistening everywhere. When the service ended, Mateo found her outside beneath the oak tree where everything had begun. "You spoke truth," he said softly. She smiled. "It's not mine, it's his." He nodded. "Still, it sounded like love?" She chuckled. "Maybe that's the same thing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out her old prayer journal, worn and soft. "You left this once," he said. "I think it's time you added a new page." Naomi opened it and smiled at the words from years ago. "Lord, teach me to forgive the silence." Below it, she wrote with trembling hand. "Thank you for turning silence into song." When she closed it, Mateo whispered, "So what's next for us?" She looked toward the church, now glowing in twilight. "Whatever he writes next," she said, "I just want to keep turning the pages with faith." That night, the town gathered for the Haven's anniversary celebration. Lights strung across the courtyard shimmered against the dark sky. Laughter, music, and prayer filled the air like one long hallelujah. Naomi stood beside Mateo, both quiet, both overwhelmed. "Do you realize," she whispered, "this all began with distance?" He smiled. "And God turned it into redemption." She nodded. "Exactly." During the closing prayer, the pastor said something that settled deep into every heart. Some stories end with goodbye, but the ones written by God always end with return. Naomi squeezed Mateo's hand, whispering, "We're proof of that." He smiled, "And maybe the next story he writes will start with someone who's listening tonight." She looked up, eyes glimmering. "Then let's tell it." Later, as the night grew quiet, Naomi stood outside watching the stars. She felt the familiar peace that once seemed impossible. "You know," she said softly, "every ending with God is just a doorway to something new." Mateo joined her, his arm brushing hers. "Then maybe this isn't the last chapter," he said. She smiled. "No, it's just the pause before the next miracle." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint echo of children's laughter. Naomi closed her eyes, whispering one last prayer for the night. "Use our story. Lord, let someone watching remember that grace can still find them." She didn't know that miles away, someone would watch this very story and whisper the same words. "Maybe God isn't done with me either." As they turned to leave, Mateo glanced back at the glowing lights of the Haven. "Do you think we'll ever really understand what he's done here?" Naomi smiled gently. "No, and that's the best part. Grace doesn't need to be understood, just received." They walked hand in hand toward the church bell, its chime echoing softly through the night, a song of endings that sounded like beginnings. The camera fades on their silhouettes walking under the stars. A narrator's voice lingers softly. They walked away in silence once, but God turned the distance into redemption. Because when grace finishes what it starts, love doesn't just return, it remains. The screen fades to black with one final line. If you believe God can still rewrite your story, stay with us for the next chapter. At Redeemed Hearts, every story is a testimony, a reflection of how God's grace meets ordinary people in extraordinary ways. We create faith-based stories of love, healing, and redemption that remind you, no distance is too far for grace to reach. Subscribe and join our growing community of hearts made new. New stories every day about forgiveness, second chances, and faith that never gives up.